Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a story you probably won't survive emotionally. Imagine waking up one morning in a peaceful home. You built with your own hands, the scent of coffee. Your son's laughter in the background, your wife humming softly in the kitchen, and realizing that every bit of it hides a secret deeper than betrayal. This isn't a story about infidelity. It's about identity, about how love can grow roots even in a lie. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. It started on a Tuesday. Tuesdays have no reputation. They're not busy like Mondays or forgiving like Fridays. Just ordinary, harmless. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping on the window, the kind that makes you think life is still gentle. My wife Lillian had already left for her yoga class, and the kitchen smelled faintly of her perfume. Lavender and something citrusy. My son Ethan had overslept again. His teenage rebellion expressed through endless snooze buttons. I remember smiling at that. Everything felt normal. Too normal. While pouring myself a second cup of coffee, I noticed her diary lying open on the table. Lillian was a private person. Even her grocery lists had elegant handwriting. I shouldn't have looked. But curiosity in marriage is like gravity. You tell yourself you're above it until you fall. The page wasn't addressed to me, but the sentence I caught froze my hand midair. He doesn't know Ethan isn't his. 5 words. That's all it took. 5 words that made the kitchen colder than the rain outside. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the ink, half expecting it to vanish if I blinked enough. Maybe it was a metaphor, I thought. Maybe she meant something spiritual, something poetic. But the next line stripped me of that hope. I never meant to hide it for this long. My chest felt like someone had stuffed it with concrete. You know how people say they felt their heart drop? That's not what happens. It doesn't drop. It clenches, it folds in on itself like paper catching fire from the inside. I sat down my knees, weak, reading further despite every instinct begging me not to. The diary wasn't new. It stretched back years, some entries written before Ethan was even born. She wrote about a man named Daniel, someone she knew from her previous job. She said it was a mistake that became a secret. People still debate whether love can forgive betrayal. I muttered to myself, but they never talk about what it does to your sense of reality. A funny thing about family life, psychologists say the average couple lies to each other 3 times a day. Small lies, white lies, harmless. You look fine, I'm just tired, nothing's wrong. Maybe that's why the big ones sneak in unnoticed. They wear the same face. As I read more, I realized I wasn't angry yet. I was just unanchored. Every sound in the house suddenly felt foreign. The refrigerator's hum, the ticking clock, the way the floor creaked. I wondered if Ethan's laugh, the one I'd cherished for 15 years, would sound different now. My phone buzzed. It was a reminder to pick him up from school. I stared at it like it belonged to another life. For a moment, I thought about closing the diary, pretending I never saw it. People still debate whether ignorance is bliss. But the truth, once glimpsed, doesn't let you go back. I took a walk in the rain that day, no umbrella, just to feel something real. The cold drops ran down my face, and I thought of how many times I'd bragged about my mini-me. How many times strangers said, "He's got your eyes," and I'd smiled proudly. Now those memories mocked me. The betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was generational. My bloodline interrupted without my consent, my legacy rewritten in someone else's DNA. When I got back home, I placed the diary exactly where it was. I didn't want her to know I'd seen it not yet, not until I could figure out what part of my life was still true. Dinner that night was silent. Lillian smiled as if nothing had shifted in the universe. Ethan complained about homework, his hair still damp from soccer practice. I remember staring at him too long, memorizing his face as if for the first time. He looked up and said, "Dad, you okay?" I said, "Yeah, just tired." The classic lie, the one that keeps marriages running. Later that night, lying in bed beside her, I watched her sleep. Her breathing was soft, peaceful, like someone who'd never carried a secret. My mind played tricks. What if the diary was therapy fiction? What if Daniel never existed? I laughed quietly to myself, one of those bitter laughs that taste like iron. And then I realized I was already preparing to forgive her, even before knowing the whole story. That's the cruelty of love. It makes you defend the very person who destroys you. That night, as the rain stopped and the room went quiet, I made a silent promise to myself. Tomorrow I'd find out the truth. But for now, I just stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of 15 years pressing down on my chest. My wife's diary had turned my home into a stranger's house, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever belong there again. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm went off. I didn't want to face another normal day, pretending nothing had changed, but that's the curse of routine. It drags you forward even when your heart's still stuck in yesterday. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the sunlight crawl through the blinds, the pale morning light falling across Lillian's face. She looked so peaceful, her hair spilling across the pillow, the same woman I'd shared 1,000 breakfasts and birthdays with. Except now every memory came with subtitles I didn't ask for. Every smile looked suspicious. Every "I love you" replayed in my mind with an echo of doubt. They say people can live double lives for years. I used to think that was just in movies. But maybe it's closer to home than we imagine. When she finally stirred and smiled at me, I felt a wave of nausea. "You're up early," she said, stretching like nothing had happened. I forced a grin. "Couldn't sleep." "You worry too much," she murmured, kissing my cheek before heading to the shower. I watched her disappear into the steam, wondering if that's how secrets work. They cleanse the soul of one person while suffocating the other. People still debate whether the act of lying hurts the liar or the one being lied to. I can tell you firsthand it's both. At breakfast, Ethan bounced down the stairs with that teenage energy I envied. He grabbed a piece of toast, talking about some school trip, and for a few seconds, I forgot everything. That's the strange mercy of love. It lets you see the person, not the pain. When he left for school, I sat there alone with my coffee, staring at the cup like it might hold answers. I picked up the diary again. The entries became darker toward the middle, shorter fragmented sentences full of regret. She wrote about being trapped by time, about how the truth would destroy 3 lives at once. I read her pain, and part of me understood it. We weren't a perfect couple. We'd had our rough years, money fights, quiet dinners, separate vacations for space. Maybe I wasn't listening when she needed me most. That doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. There's always an explanation. Always. I drove to work, but didn't go in. I sat in the parking lot for an hour watching people walk in and out of the building, their faces blank, their coffee cups clutched like shields against the world. I envied them. Ignorance is the most underrated form of peace. I turned off the car and went for a drive instead. The kind of drive you take when you're looking for yourself but keep finding the wrong person. I passed the old park where we used to take Ethan when he was little. I remembered pushing him on the swing, Lillian. Laughing sunlight spilling through the trees. I wondered if Daniel had been alive in her thoughts even then. Maybe she was smiling at two men at once. Maybe I was living half a marriage and didn't know it. By noon, I'd made a decision not about what to do next, but about how to survive the day. I wouldn't confront her yet. I needed to see her truth in action, not words. The diary was one side of the story. I wanted to see how she looked at me now that I knew. Would she flinch? Would she sense my knowledge hanging in the air like invisible smoke? So I went home early, pretending I'd forgotten my laptop. She was in the living room, humming to herself while folding laundry. Ordinary. So painfully ordinary. She looked up and smiled. Home already. That smile, it wasn't guilty or nervous. It was just Lillian. That made it worse, because then I realized the woman who betrayed me was also the woman I loved most in the world. Two truths living in one body. Later that evening, we had dinner like always. Chicken, stew, garlic bread, soft music. My fork clinked against the plate, loud in the silence. "You okay?" she asked. "You've been quiet lately," I said. "Just tired, maybe getting old." She laughed. "You said that last week." I smiled faintly. "Guess I've been tired for 15 years then." She looked at me puzzled, but I quickly changed the subject. I wasn't ready to break the fragile illusion yet. I wanted one more night of pretending, just one more, before the storm began. That night I sat on the porch after everyone went to bed, the cool air sharp against my skin. I thought about how many families probably sit like mine, with hidden truths simmering under the surface. Statistically, 1 in 10 fathers worldwide raise a child who isn't biologically theirs without knowing it. 1 in 10. That's not a scandal, it's a phenomenon. Some countries even have laws preventing paternity testing without both parents' consent to avoid emotional harm. Strange how laws protect lies better than they protect love. People still debate whether truth should be mandatory in relationships. But if truth destroys peace, what's the better crime? Honesty or silence? As I sat there, I heard footsteps behind me. Lillian stepped out, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. "It's cold," she said softly. I nodded. "Couldn't sleep again?" she asked. "Too many thoughts," I replied. "Like what?" "Like how we all think we know the people closest to us." She looked at me strangely, then smiled faintly. "You sound like you're rehearsing for one of your work presentations." I forced a laugh. "Maybe I am." She kissed my forehead and whispered, "You think too much." And then she went inside. I watched her go, realizing she had no idea that her world was about to collapse. Or maybe she did, and she was just better at hiding it than I was at pretending. Before going to bed, I picked up the diary again, reading the last entry she'd written. "If he ever finds out, I hope he remembers the father he's been, not the one he thought he was." That line broke me more than any confession could, because she was right, I had been a father. Maybe not by blood, but by every sleepless night, every scraped knee, every math problem I helped solve. I closed the diary and whispered to myself, "Then let's see if love can survive biology." But deep down, I already knew tomorrow would demand an answer. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the ceiling fade from gray to blue, my mind replaying every moment of our marriage like an old home video with a hidden glitch. The laughter, the vacations, the way she looked at Ethan when he was born. Everything had a new, corrupted filter. I wondered if I was a fool or just human. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I had to know if it was real. The diary could be old, mistaken, or even imagined. But the truth, my truth, needed proof. So while Lillian took Ethan to school, I sat at my desk and searched online for DNA testing services. It felt dirty, like spying on my own life. The irony wasn't lost on me. In a world obsessed with privacy, I was about to invade my own. I ordered a home paternity test, simple swabs, quick results, promises of peace of mind. Whoever wrote that marketing slogan must have never faced betrayal. There's no peace in knowing only the illusion of control. The kit would arrive in 3 days. 3 days of pretending. 3 days of smiling like nothing was wrong. I almost laughed at the absurdity. 3 days is how long a weekend getaway lasts. How long it takes bread to go stale, or how long it takes for a secret to rot a soul. Those 3 days stretched into years. I became hyper-aware of everything, her glances, her tone, even the way she poured my coffee. Once I caught her looking at me, her eyes soft with affection. I wondered if that affection was guilt wearing makeup. People still debate whether guilt is love's shadow or its opposite. I didn't have an answer. On the second evening, I took Ethan to the park. It was supposed to be father-son time. He was laughing, chasing a soccer ball, shouting, "Come on, old man, you can't keep up." I laughed back, pretending, but my throat burned. Every time I looked at him, I saw a question I couldn't yet answer. When we sat on the bench afterward, sweaty and happy, he said, "You're the best dad." I froze. That word dad sounded both sacred and stolen. I wanted to tell him the truth, but what truth? The truth that might destroy his sense of belonging. I just patted his shoulder and said, "You're not so bad yourself, champ." I think my smile held the entire weight of the universe. That night, while Lillian slept, I stood by the window again. My reflection looked older, sharper, as if betrayal had chiseled new lines into my face. I remembered reading once that stress can age a person by 7 years in a single season. Maybe that's why heartbreak feels like time travel. You jump ahead to a version of yourself you didn't earn. I almost wanted to wake her up to demand answers, but I didn't. I wanted to see if she'd tell me first. Spoiler, she didn't. On the third morning, the package arrived. I felt my pulse in my fingertips as I tore it open. Inside 2 sterile swabs, a few labeled envelopes, and a set of instructions too cheerful for what they represented. I waited until Ethan came home from school. "Hey, buddy," I said casually, "I need your help for a science thing. Just a quick swab for fun." He laughed, rolled his eyes, but complied. I felt sick while doing it, smiling the whole time. "You're so weird." "Dad," he said, wiping his mouth. "That's my job," I replied. Then I took my own sample, sealed the envelopes, and sent them off. I thought I'd feel relief, but instead it felt like I'd just mailed away the last of my innocence. The waiting was brutal. Every knock on the door, every email notification made my chest tighten. I started noticing things about Lillian I'd never paid attention to, the way she hummed when nervous, the way she touched her ring absent-mindedly, the slight tremor in her hands when pouring wine. We were a couple of ghosts haunting the same house, pretending to be alive. 2 days later, I came home early again. She was in the backyard, hanging laundry under the afternoon sun. I stood there watching her from the kitchen window. She looked so normal, so beautifully mundane. And for a terrifying second, I wished I'd never opened that diary. Some truths are like glass once shattered. You cut yourself every time you try to hold them. That evening, I decided to test her subtly. Over dinner, I said, "Do you ever think secrets help or hurt families?" She froze, fork halfway to her mouth. "What kind of secrets?" she asked, cautious. "Oh, I don't know." I shrugged, like, things you think are protecting someone but might actually break them. She set down her fork slowly. "You're being weird lately," she said. "Work stress." I smiled faintly. Something like that. Later that night, she came into the living room and sat beside me. "You're scaring me," she whispered. "You've been distant." I looked at her, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear myself. "Lillian," I said, "if there's something you need to tell me now, would be a good time." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She stared at me for a long moment, then said softly, "There's nothing really." She kissed my hand, got up, and walked away. I watched her back disappear down the hall, realizing that silence was its own kind of confession. The next morning, the email arrived. "Your results are ready." I sat at my desk, staring at the screen like it held my destiny. My fingers hovered over the mouse, trembling. I clicked. The world didn't explode, but it might as well have. Probability of paternity, 0.0%. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just sat there, breathing through the kind of silence that only truth can create. Outside, a bird sang. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm blared. Life kept going indifferent to my implosion. People still debate whether truth sets you free. They never mention it first kills the person you used to be. When Lillian came home that evening, she found me sitting in the dark. "You're home early again?" she said, trying to sound light. "Yeah," I replied. "Just didn't feel like being anywhere else." She frowned. "Are you okay?" I looked up at her and said calmly, "No, but you will be once you tell me what I already know." Her face drained of color. The game was over. She froze, standing in the doorway as if my words were bullets that pierced through every layer of her composure. Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The silence between us was loud enough to fill the whole house. "How long have you known?" she finally whispered. I looked at her for a moment before answering. "Long enough to realize I've been living with a stranger." The words came out calm, too calm, like a man describing his own crime scene. She dropped her purse on the floor, the sound echoing sharp against the tiles. "Please," she said, stepping forward, "let me explain." I shook my head slowly. "Explain what, Lillian?" "The science. The statistics, the 15 years of pretending." She sat down across from me, her eyes glassy. "I never meant to hurt you," she started. "It was before we were married. I thought it was over. And then when I found out I was pregnant, I convinced myself it had to be yours. You wanted a family so badly. I was terrified the truth would destroy everything." I laughed under my breath, a soft, bitter laugh. "Congratulations," I said quietly. "It destroyed everything anyway." She reached out for my hand, but I pulled away. That tiny gesture felt like an earthquake. She started crying, real tears, the kind that make you want to forgive, even when you shouldn't. "You were always so kind," she said through the sobs. "You loved me more than I deserved. That's why I couldn't tell you." I stood up, pacing the room. "You had 15 years, I said. 15 years to tell me the truth, Lillian. You watched me teach him to ride a bike. You watched me call him son 1,000 times. You watched me believe." My voice cracked on that last word. Believe. It's strange how faith and betrayal can share the same space in your chest. She whispered, "I thought it wouldn't matter. You were his father in every way that counted." I turned to her sharply. "No, I was his father in every way that hurt." She covered her face with her hands. "You're right," she said, her voice breaking. "But please don't make him suffer for my mistake." That stopped me. Because she was right about one thing, Ethan didn't choose this. He didn't write the diary. He didn't lie. He just existed in the middle of a truth too heavy for a child to carry. I sat back down, breathing slowly. "Does he know?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, God, no. He thinks you're his father. You are his father." "No, Lillian," I said softly. "I was his father, until this." I gestured vaguely toward the laptop on the table. The open email glowed like an open wound. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the clock, a reminder that time doesn't pause for heartbreak. People still debate whether forgiveness is a choice or an instinct. At that moment, I realized it's neither. It's a survival mechanism. You forgive, not because they deserve it, but because anger burns too much oxygen to live on. But I wasn't ready yet. "Who is he?" I finally asked. She looked up, startled. "Who?" "You know who," I said. "The man, the real father." Her face went pale. She hesitated, then whispered a name I hadn't heard in years. "Daniel." The same name from the diary. My mind flashed back. Daniel, her old coworker from the architecture firm where she worked before Ethan was born. The man who once helped us move furniture when we bought this house. The man who stood beside me at Ethan's christening, smiling for photos. I felt sick. "You mean that, Daniel?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. I laughed again, this time, hollow echoing off the walls. "The man I trusted in my home," I said. "The man who drank my whiskey and called me brother." Lillian cried harder. "It was one night, one stupid night. I hated myself for it. But then we had Ethan, and he looked so much like you. I thought maybe fate was forgiving me." I rubbed my temples. "Fate doesn't forgive, Lillian. It collects." I didn't shout. I didn't break things. I just walked to the window and looked outside. The evening sky was painted with soft pink light so calm it mocked me. How can the world stay beautiful when your life collapses? I heard her behind me, quietly sobbing, and I remembered the day I married her, how sure I was that we'd outlast every storm. I was wrong. "Does he know?" I asked again, meaning Daniel this time. She nodded weakly. "He found out years ago, but he promised not to interfere." I turned to her slowly. "Not to interfere? You mean not to claim his own son? You both conspired to let me live in a lie?" "Please," she said. "He's never been part of our lives. He respected your place." "Respected my place?" I snapped. "You mean the place where I raised another man's child and thanked him for it?" I had to step outside before I said something I couldn't take back. The air was cold, crisp, cleansing. I sat on the porch steps, staring into the yard. The house behind me suddenly felt too full of ghosts. I heard her voice faintly through the screen door. "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer, because the truth was, I didn't know. Somewhere between fury and love, there's a limbo where you stop recognizing yourself. That's where I was. Half a husband, half a father, fully broken. I thought about Ethan's face, his laugh, the way he hugged me after every game. I thought about the first time he called me Dad. I realized that biology had nothing to do with the warmth I felt then. Maybe love doesn't need blood, but betrayal sure knows how to drain it. As the night settled in, I whispered to the quiet yard, "You probably wouldn't survive this story if it were yours." And I meant it, because part of me was dying with every breath, and the rest was learning how to live again in the ruins. The following morning, the air in the house felt thicker than ever, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I didn't hear Lillian moving around, didn't smell her usual coffee brewing, didn't hear the clinking of cups. When I walked into the kitchen, she was sitting at the table, eyes red, a folded letter in front of her. She didn't look up. "I thought about leaving," she said quietly. "I even packed a bag last night. But then I realized running won't undo anything." I stood there, staring at her, the woman I once trusted more than myself. "Where would you go?" I asked. "Anywhere that doesn't hurt," she whispered. "Except that's nowhere anymore." I sat down opposite her, the same seat I'd taken the morning I found her diary. It felt poetic in the most painful way. "Ethan's at school," she continued, "so we should talk before he comes home." I nodded. She looked exhausted, her voice trembling with guilt. "I know you hate me," she said, "and I don't blame you. But before you decide what happens next, please remember, everything I did after that night was real. Every moment, every meal, every kiss. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Then why does it feel like none of it was? She wiped her face with trembling hands. Because you're seeing it through pain now, she said. But it was real, I swear. You were the one who built our life. You raised him. You gave us stability. Without you, there wouldn't have even been a family to lose. I wanted to scream, but all I could manage was a bitter laugh. So I was your cover story, I said. The stand-in husband, the emotional insurance policy. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. No, she said sharply. You were the heart of this family, the only man who ever made me feel safe. That's what makes this unbearable. I broke the one person who saved me. For a long time, we just sat there. The ticking clock on the wall was the only sound counting down the seconds of a marriage that no longer existed. Then I asked her something that had been burning in my chest since last night. If Ethan ever finds out, how will you explain it to him? She hesitated. He'll never know, not if we protect him. I frowned. Protect him from what? The truth. From pain, she said quickly. From growing up thinking his life was built on lies. I shook my head slowly. But it was built on lies, Lillian. You can't protect him from reality. She stood and walked toward the sink, her shoulders trembling. I'll tell him someday, she whispered. But not now. He's still a kid. I watched her in silence, and for the first time I noticed how fragile she looked. I used to think betrayal was all rage and fire, but seeing her there, broken, scared, and human, it was like looking at the ruins of a home after a storm. You can hate the wind all you want, but you still have to rebuild. I left the house before Ethan got home. I didn't want him to see my face not like this. I drove aimlessly for hours, the road a blur of gray and yellow lines. I ended up at the lake where we used to take family picnics. The water was still mirroring the clouds. I sat on a bench, remembering a fact I'd once read. The human brain can't distinguish emotional pain from physical pain. It reacts the same way. No wonder heartbreak feels like drowning. My chest hurt as if I'd run miles even though I hadn't moved at all. I thought about calling someone. Maybe my brother. Maybe an old friend. But what would I even say? Hey, remember my perfect family? Turns out it's a science experiment gone wrong, so I sat there silent watching the ripples on the water. People still debate whether love can survive betrayal. I wasn't sure anymore. Maybe love doesn't die. It just changes its shape until you can't recognize it. When I got home, Ethan was sitting at the dining table doing homework. He looked up and grinned. Hey, Dad, Mom said you were out getting groceries. I nodded faintly. Yeah, something like that. His face was bright innocent. Can you help me with this math thing? He asked, waving his notebook. My heart twisted. I wanted to say yes, but I could barely think straight. Later, buddy, Hart, I said. Dad's a bit tired tonight. His smile faded just a little. Okay, he said softly. I went upstairs and found Lillian sitting on the edge of the bed. She looked up. He's worried about you, she said. I nodded. He should be, I muttered. He's about to find out who I really am. Please, she begged, don't do this tonight. Let him have one more day of peace. I stared at her. That's exactly what you've been saying for 15 years. One more day, one more lie. She didn't answer. That night I slept in the guest room for the first time in our marriage. The bed was smaller, the sheets smelled different. It's funny how you can measure the size of a betrayal by the silence of an empty bed. I lay awake, listening to the faint creaks of the house, the muffled sound of Lillian crying through the wall. For a moment, I almost went to her, not because I forgave her, but because I hated how familiar her pain sounded. Before falling asleep, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, if love can survive this, then maybe I'm not human anymore. But deep down, I already knew tomorrow would force me to choose between the truth and the only family I'd ever known. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds like nothing had changed, but everything had. I could hear laughter downstairs, faint and bright, like the echo of a world I no longer belonged to. Ethan was joking with his mom, his voice carefree, while mine was heavy with the weight of knowledge. For a moment, I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands, wondering if they still looked like a father's hands or just a stranger's. They'd built toys, held tiny fingers, taught lessons, comforted fears, and now they trembled not from age, but from uncertainty. What do you do when your entire role in life turns out to be borrowed? When I finally went downstairs, Lillian stopped mid-sentence. The room went quiet. Ethan looked up, smiling. "Morning, Dad." That word Dad hit differently now. It felt like a borrowed coat that no longer fit, but you couldn't take off because someone still believed it was yours. I forced a smile. "Morning, champ. Ready for school?" He nodded eagerly, grabbing his backpack. Lillian avoided my eyes as I drove him. The silence between us was thicker than fog. He talked about a science fair, about building a model volcano. I listened, nodding at the right moments, while inside, I was the volcano quiet now. But seconds from erupting. After dropping him off, I parked the car and sat there gripping the steering wheel. My reflection in the windshield looked older than I remembered. I thought about something I'd once read in a parenting article. Fatherhood is defined not by genetics, but by consistency. Back then, I'd nodded proudly. Now those words felt like a cruel joke. Still, I couldn't shake the truth that blood or not, Ethan was mine. I'd been there for every scraped knee, every nightmare, every late-night science project. He might not share my DNA, but he carried my habits, my sarcasm, even my love for bad coffee. People still debate whether nurture or nature defines a man, but in that car, it didn't feel like a debate. It felt like a war. When I returned home, Lillian was sitting on the couch, eyes swollen from crying. "We can't live like this," she said softly. "Ethan will notice." I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "He already notices. He just doesn't understand why." "Then please," she said, voice trembling, "don't punish him for my sin." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked past her and sat down across the room. "I'm not punishing him," I said finally. "I'm punishing myself for believing too much." She reached for me, desperate. "You still have a choice," she whispered. "We can heal from this." I laughed quietly, shaking my head. "Heal, Lillian. This isn't a wound. It's an amputation. I'm still trying to figure out which part of me got cut off." Her eyes filled with tears again. "Please don't leave," she said. "We'll go to counseling therapy, whatever it takes. Just don't destroy our son's life." That word, "our," hit hard. I wanted to say, "He's yours, not mine." But I couldn't. Because deep down I knew she was right. His life was ours, built together even if its foundation was flawed. I stood up, pacing. "You think counseling fixes blood?" I asked. "You think a therapist can rewrite DNA?" "No," she said. "But maybe they can help you remember the years before this truth existed. The love that was real, even if the origin wasn't." Her words lingered. The years before the truth. There had been happiness, laughter, shared dreams. I remembered the night Ethan was born. She was crying, exhausted, holding that tiny body against her chest. I'd looked at him and thought, this is the beginning of everything. And maybe it still was just not the beginning I thought. That afternoon, I found myself at the old community center sitting on a park bench, watching families walk by. fathers pushing strollers, kids tugging on hands, mothers laughing. It struck me how easily people move through life, assuming love is simple, that family is pure. But behind every smiling photo, there's a hidden story. Some people hide debt. Some hide sickness. Some, like us, hide a truth too painful to speak. I thought about talking to someone, maybe a priest, though I wasn't religious. Maybe just to hear another human voice not colored by betrayal. But I stayed silent. Instead, I remembered something odd I once read about ancient inheritance customs. In some tribes, a child was considered to belong to the mother's husband, no matter who the biological father was, because love was law. The community believed blood didn't define a family. Commitment did. Maybe those people were wiser than we are now. Maybe they understood that sometimes truth destroys more than lies ever could. When I came home, Lillian was cooking dinner pretending normalcy again. Ethan invited his friends over Saturday, she said quietly, for a game night. He's excited. I nodded absently. She hesitated, then asked, "Will you be here?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe I should leave for a while. Clear my head." Her hand froze mid-stir. "Please don't," she said. "Not yet. Let's get through this week first for him." That night, after Ethan went to bed, I stood outside his room. I could hear his soft breathing through the door. I thought about how many nights I'd stood there before, when he had nightmares, when he was sick, when he was just a baby kicking in his crib. None of that was fake. None of it was borrowed. It was mine, even if the science said otherwise. I went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and whispered into the quiet. Maybe being a father isn't about the blood that flows through you, but the love that refuses to leave. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something like understanding. Still, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, one question echoed louder than all the rest. How do you tell a boy he was born of love and lies at the same time? Days passed, and the silence in our home settled like a fog that refused to lift. Lillian and I spoke only when necessary about bills, about groceries, about Ethan's schedule. Every word between us carried the weight of unspoken truths. It was strange, almost absurd, how easily a family can keep functioning after its foundation cracks. People still debate whether pretending holds things together or tears them apart faster. I didn't have the answer. I only knew that pretending had become our default survival instinct. Ethan remained blissfully unaware. He went to school, joked with friends, and told me about his science fair project every evening. "Dad, when the volcano erupts, it's gonna look awesome," he said, eyes glowing. That word again, Dad. It burned and healed at the same time. I smiled weakly, saying, "Can't wait to see it, champ." Inside, I wondered how long before those simple words became weapons. Then came Saturday, the game night. Our living room buzzed with the sound of teenage laughter and soda cans opening. Lillian moved through the crowd like a hostess, trying too hard, smiling a little too wide. I stayed mostly quiet, watching from the sidelines. When Ethan's friends left later that night, he turned to us and said, "Thanks for letting them come. You're the best parents." He hugged us both. That was the first time I broke in days. I hugged him tighter than I meant to. I could feel Lillian shaking beside me. After he went upstairs, I poured myself a drink and sat at the table staring at the glass. "He's happy," Lillian said softly behind me. "That's what matters, right?" I looked at her. Happiness built on lies is a ticking clock. It runs beautifully until it explodes. She sat down across from me, exhausted. "Then tell him," she said suddenly. "If you can't live like this anymore, tell him. I'll stand by whatever you decide." Her words caught me off guard. I'd expected her to fight, to beg me to keep the secret longer. Instead, she looked relieved, as if waiting for me to carry the burden she couldn't. "You'd let me destroy his peace?" I asked. "You think keeping him in the dark is peace," she countered. "Secrets rot people even when they don't know it." That was the first time I saw honesty in her eyes again, not the honesty of confession, but the honesty of surrender. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, listening to the soft rhythm of Ethan's laughter replaying in my head, followed by the sound of Lillian crying quietly in the next room. At dawn, I made coffee and stared out the window, watching the sun rise like a question I wasn't ready to answer. Later that morning, I drove to the lake again, the same spot where I'd once sat alone, trying to make sense of betrayal. The water was calm, glistening under the soft light. I remembered something I'd read years ago in a sociology article, how some families in certain cultures hold truth ceremonies, where hidden truths are revealed collectively, not as confession, but as cleansing. The theory said that truth once shared loses its power to destroy. I wondered if that could work for us, or if the truth once spoken aloud would tear us apart forever. When I came home, Ethan was in the backyard building his volcano with cardboard and paint. His concentration was pure, untouched by adult complexity. I watched him for a while, and something inside me softened. I realized I'd spent weeks thinking of him as a symbol of betrayal, when in reality, he was innocent, a boy who just wanted his dad to watch his volcano erupt. Maybe love didn't need to survive betrayal. Maybe it just needed to adapt. That evening, I told Lillian we needed to talk after dinner. She nodded silently. I think she already knew what was coming. After Ethan went to bed, I sat her down in the living room. "I'm not going to tell him," I said quietly. She looked up, startled. "Not now, at least. Maybe one day, when he's grown enough to understand that truth isn't always cruel." Her lips trembled. You're sure?" I nodded. "I've thought about it. I won't punish him for something he didn't choose. He's still my son. Even if my blood says otherwise, my soul refuses to agree." She started crying again, covering her mouth with her hands. I felt a strange calm wash over me, not forgiveness, but clarity. But I continued, "This doesn't mean we're fine, Lillian. It doesn't mean I can forget. I just don't want him to lose both parents because of one night 15 years ago." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do anything to make it right," she whispered. "Then start by never lying again," I said. The next morning I made breakfast, pancakes, his favorite. When Ethan came down, I smiled for real this time. Not perfectly, but enough. "You ready for your volcano?" I asked. "Almost," he said excitedly. "Mom helped me paint the lava." He grabbed a fork and started eating. For the first time in weeks, the house felt almost normal. After he left for school, I sat with Lillian in the quiet kitchen. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. There's a strange peace that comes after emotional war, not joy, not comfort, just the exhaustion of survival. People still debate whether truth heals or just scars differently. I think it does both. That night, as I watched Ethan sleeping, I realized something profound. I might never forgive Lillian fully. I might never trust her completely again. But I could still choose love, not for her, but for him. Because at the end of the day, fatherhood isn't about who gave life. It's about who stays when life falls apart. It had been almost 2 weeks since the night everything shattered. On the surface, life looked ordinary again. Ethan went to school. Lillian returned to work, and I pretended to be the same man I had been before I read those 5 words in her diary. But pretending is an art form, and I was becoming an unwilling master. I moved through our house like an actor stuck in a role he no longer believed in. Every smile was rehearsed, every word measured, every silence heavy. Yet deep down, something in me had shifted. I was no longer searching for punishment. I was searching for meaning. Maybe that's what happens when betrayal settles. Anger burns out, and you're left with the ashes of understanding. I noticed the small things first, how Lillian hesitated before touching my shoulder, how she spoke softer, more carefully, as if afraid her words might break me again. Ethan, ever oblivious, seemed to fill the spaces between us with his laughter. He'd throw his backpack on the couch, tell us stories from school, and I'd nod like a man trying to memorize the sound of joy. Sometimes I caught Lillian watching me while he spoke, as though trying to read whether I still saw our son the same way. Truth is, I did, but differently. Love after betrayal is like a cracked mirror. It still reflects, just not cleanly. One evening I got home later than usual. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the dishwasher. Ethan was upstairs, and Lillian was sitting by the window, a book open in her lap. She looked up as I entered. "You're late," she said softly. I nodded. Had some paperwork to finish. It was true, but incomplete. I had also spent an hour parked outside the office, debating whether to call Daniel. The thought had been haunting me since she'd said his name. The man had lived in the shadows of my life, and I needed to face him not out of revenge, but to reclaim some part of my story. I poured myself a drink, sat down across from her, and said quietly, "I'm going to meet him." She froze. "Daniel, yeah." Her book slipped from her hand. Why, I stared into my glass. Because I need to see what kind of man he is. The one who helped create this chaos and then walked away as if nothing happened. She swallowed hard. He doesn't want anything from us. He never has. That's what I want to find out, I said. You can't stop me. The next day I found his address online. He still lived in the same city not far from where Lillian used to work all those years ago. I drove there in silence, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My mind was a carousel of conflicting thoughts. What if he looked like Ethan? What if I saw myself reflected in him, not through blood, but through irony? People still debate whether confronting your pain brings closure or just opens new wounds. I was about to find out. When I arrived, the neighborhood looked painfully ordinary. Trimmed lawns, quiet driveways, wind chimes. His house was small, but neat with a freshly painted door. I rang the bell, and a few seconds later he opened it. Daniel looked older than I remembered, graying hair, tired eyes, the faint stiffness of someone who's carried guilt too long. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Recognition flickered between us like lightning. "I guess you know why I'm here," I said. He nodded slowly. I was wondering when this day would come. He invited me in. The living room was filled with family photos, his wife, 2 younger kids, a dog. A normal, stable life. I hated how normal it looked. We sat across from each other, 2 men bound by one boy. "You knew all along," I said quietly. He nodded. "Yes." She told me right after Ethan was born. I wanted to step in to be part of his life, but she said you were his real father, and she was right. I clenched my jaw. She lied to both of us. He sighed. She lied out of fear, not cruelty. "You have to understand," I interrupted, "that she cheated, that she built a life on a lie and dragged us into it." He looked down, then said something I didn't expect. "I think about him every year on his birthday, but I've never once thought he'd be better off knowing me. You gave him everything. I gave him a mistake." His voice cracked slightly. "If it helps, I've lived with that guilt every day." I studied him. He wasn't what I expected. There was no arrogance, no defensiveness, just quiet remorse. It disarmed me. "You ever think about telling him?" I asked. He shook his head. "I promised her I wouldn't, and I've kept that promise." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Well, the secret's out now, and I have to live with it. He nodded. So do I. The air between us felt heavy with everything we couldn't say. After a while, he asked softly, "Do you hate me?" I looked at him, really looked at him, the man who unintentionally fathered my son. I did, I admitted. But now, I just pity us both. You lost a son you can't claim. I lost a truth I can't unlearn. When I left his house, the sky had turned orange with the setting sun. I stood by my car for a long time, staring at nothing. I didn't feel rage anymore, just emptiness, the quiet kind that follows emotional earthquakes. It's strange how after the loudest pain, silence becomes the only language that makes sense. That night I didn't tell Lillian what happened. I just came home, kissed Ethan on the head as he worked on his science project, and went to bed. But something inside me had changed. Seeing Daniel didn't make the pain vanish, it gave it context. He wasn't a villain, just another broken man caught in the same web of choices. That realization didn't fix anything, but it made forgiveness seem slightly less impossible. A few days later, Ethan's science fair took place at the local community hall. Lillian and I stood side by side, clapping, as he presented his project to the judges. He was radiant, confident, articulate, alive. When the volcano erupted perfectly, spilling red foam and applause, he grinned at me. "Told you it'd work, Dad," he shouted. And in that moment, something inside me softened completely. Because no matter what the DNA test said, no piece of paper could erase the years we'd built. Love may not rewrite biology, but it rewrites identity. After the fair, we went out for ice cream. Lillian looked at me across the table, nervous, searching my face for signs of hope. I didn't say much. I just reached out, placing my hand over hers, not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement. We were both guilty and both wounded, yet somehow still a family. Broken doesn't mean finished. That night when Ethan was asleep, I told her about meeting Daniel. She went pale. "Why would you do that?" she whispered. "Because I needed to see the ghost," I said, "and now that I have, I can stop haunting myself." She looked down, tears forming again. "Did he hate me?" "No," I said quietly. "He hates himself. That's punishment enough." We sat in silence for a long time. Then she asked, "Do you think we can ever go back?" I shook my head gently. "No, Lillian. But maybe we can go forward differently." She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "I'll take that," she said. "Forward is enough." As I lay in bed later, I thought about the oddest fact I'd come across during my endless late-night readings on family psychology. Some scientists claim humans are wired to care for children even if they know the child isn't theirs. Evolution, they say, rewards attachment more than truth. Maybe that's why I still felt protective of Ethan, why I still loved him like nothing had changed. Maybe nature had mercy after all. People still debate whether truth liberates or destroys. But as I watched Lillian sleep beside me, fragile, remorseful human, I realized something unexpected. Truth does both, but what follows after is up to us. It can either end you or rebirth you. For the first time since that morning in the kitchen, I didn't feel like a victim of her diary. I felt like a survivor of it. And somewhere deep down beneath the scars, a quiet peace began to grow. Not forgiveness, not forgetfulness, but something close to acceptance. I whispered into the darkness, "I may not share his blood, but he carries my soul." And for the first time in weeks, I closed my eyes and slept through the night. During breakfast one morning, I noticed a detail I had never observed before. The way Ethan's hair caught the sunlight, just so turning his curls golden around the edges. My chest ached at the sight. He looked so much like himself, completely innocent, completely unaware of the emotional earthquake that had shaken the foundation of our family. It struck me how children have this incredible capacity to live entirely in the moment. Statistics say that children's emotional memory is surprisingly resilient, yet remarkably fragile. One shocking revelation can reverberate through a lifetime if delivered at the wrong time. People still debate whether shielding them from truth helps or harms them. I wasn't ready to answer that, but I knew one thing: I would choose protection for him, even at the cost of my own peace. Lillian had begun attending therapy sessions alone. She claimed she needed guidance to navigate her own guilt and grief. I supported her silently, though the process was invisible and quiet, just as all emotional labor is often invisible. I wasn't naive. I knew the therapy wasn't a fix for Ethan or for the years of deception, but it was a step. Sometimes the smallest steps toward accountability feel like mountains in a landscape littered with pain. Meanwhile, I continued my quiet observation, paying attention to how she interacted with Ethan, how she masked the past while keeping the present intact. It fascinated me, this delicate balancing act between reality and performance. One afternoon, I found myself rifling through old photographs, the ones we had displayed in frames and albums. I looked at each one carefully, noting the smiles, the vacations, the birthdays, the milestones. I realized that while the truth had been concealed, the love in those moments was real. I remembered carrying Ethan home from the hospital, teaching him to ride a bike, sitting through endless homework sessions. None of that could be erased, not even by the knowledge of his biological parentage. Biology didn't define the essence of our relationship, experience did. That evening, I took a long walk through the neighborhood, hoping that fresh air and movement could somehow cleanse the lingering heaviness in my mind. I passed by families in their yards, children playing with dogs, neighbors chatting over fences. In their ordinary lives, there was a sense of continuity, of simple, untroubled existence. I wondered how many of them were quietly carrying their own secrets, their own betrayals, their own moments of concealed truths. Social science tells us that people are remarkably adept at maintaining facades, but the energy required to uphold them is immense. I felt that energy coursing through me, the invisible strain of pretending to be okay when you're not. Returning home. I sat on the porch with a drink in hand, watching the sunset reflect across the lake near our house. The water was calm, untroubled, and in that quiet, I began to confront my own inner dialogue. I realized that the person I had been before discovering the diary no longer existed. That man, the trusting, unquestioned father and husband, had been replaced by someone who had survived deception, who had learned to navigate uncertainty, who had gained insight into human frailty. It wasn't a comfort exactly, but it was a foundation upon which I could begin to rebuild. When I came inside, I found Lillian in the kitchen, quietly preparing dinner. She looked up as I entered and smiled softly, though her eyes still carried the remnants of recent tears. "Long walk?" she asked. I nodded, thinking I said simply. We didn't elaborate because sometimes words only serve to fracture what little peace remains. Silence, in its own way, had become our language. Later, as Ethan worked on a puzzle at the dining table, I sat beside him, helping him align the pieces. It was absurdly simple, and yet in those moments of ordinary connection, I felt the pulse of genuine fatherhood. Every piece he placed correctly felt like a reaffirmation, not of biology, but of the bond we had painstakingly built together. The irony wasn't lost on me. 15 years of raising him, teaching him, loving him unconditionally, and now the legal truth meant nothing to the emotional truth. I realized that parenthood is far more than genetics. It's a collection of countless tiny investments of care and attention repeated daily until they become inseparable from the child's identity. That night, I finally sat down with Lillian to speak openly about the future. "We need a plan," I said, "for us, for Ethan." She nodded, listening intently. "No secrets," I continued. "We tell him the truth when he's ready, and until then, we protect him. But we can't hide from each other anymore." She reached for my hand, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the warmth of partnership rather than the cold weight of guilt. We didn't solve everything that night, but we laid a foundation of transparency, a shared commitment to navigate the aftermath with integrity. The following weekend, I decided to focus on something concrete, creating memories rather than ruminating on betrayal. I took Ethan to the lake, his favorite spot, bringing fishing rods, sandwiches, and a frisbee. As he ran ahead, laughing, I followed, noticing how the sunlight danced across his hair, how effortlessly he carried the joy of youth. I realized in a moment of clarity that no deception could take these moments from him. He would remember the adventures, the care, the attention. The foundation we had laid flawed, as it was still held. Returning home, Lillian and I prepared dinner together, our movements synchronized in a quiet domestic rhythm. The air was charged with unspoken acknowledgement of our shared pain, yet also with tentative hope. I realized that rebuilding a family after betrayal isn't about erasing the past. It's about consciously choosing the present moment by moment, even when the weight of what has been done presses heavily on every decision. Each shared meal, each conversation, each simple gesture of affection became a thread stitching the fabric of our family back together. As night fell, I sat alone for a while on the porch, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The betrayal, the confrontation, the meeting with Daniel, the silent agreements, the shared pain, all of it had reshaped me. I thought about the odd customs I had read about in anthropology texts, where entire communities practiced truth-telling ceremonies to prevent secrets from destroying social bonds. Perhaps we could adapt that principle in our own way, not through formal rituals, but through openness, accountability, and patience. People still debate whether love can endure after such profound deception. I can't provide a universal answer. But what I can say is that love, when coupled with conscious effort, awareness, and a commitment to the well-being of the innocent, in this case, Ethan, does not simply vanish. It transforms, adjusts, and endures in unexpected ways. That night, I went to bed with a quiet determination. I would continue to be a father to Ethan, to protect him, to love him even as I navigated the uneasy waters of betrayal and reconciliation. And so the house fell silent again. Lillian upstairs, Ethan asleep, and me reflecting on the complicated tapestry of human emotions. Pain and love, intertwined in ways I could not have imagined. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, there was clarity. Parenthood is not solely about DNA, and family is not solely about perfection. It's about commitment, presence, and the courage to continue, even when the past threatens to undo everything. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility, the ache of betrayal, and the quiet satisfaction of surviving another day. I whispered softly into the darkness, "We will endure, even if imperfectly. We will endure for him." And for the first time in weeks, I felt the fragile warmth of hope. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of reconciliation, restraint, and cautious optimism. Life at home resumed its ordinary rhythms, but with an added undercurrent of awareness, an invisible thread connecting Lillian and me, woven from guilt, remorse, and tentative trust. Ethan thrived in this environment of normalcy, blissfully unaware of the upheaval beneath the surface. His laughter became the anchor for both of us, a constant reminder that innocence could coexist with deception, and that life somehow continues even after the worst truths are revealed. I found myself observing Ethan more closely than ever, noting how he solved puzzles, how he interacted with friends, how his emotions flared and subsided. Each moment reinforced my understanding that fatherhood is about presence, guidance, and emotional investment rather than blood. Researchers in child psychology have long debated the relative influence of nurture versus nature, and sitting on the floor assembling Lego sets with him, I felt I had the answer firsthand. I was shaping his world, his values, his confidence, not as his biological father, but as the man who had been there every step of the way. Lillian and I established a routine of open communication, silent but potent. We no longer avoided the elephant in the room. Instead, we acknowledged it indirectly in subtle glances, brief mentions, and shared acts of care. I noticed the change in her. The tension around her shoulders eased slightly. Her eyes reflected honesty rather than fear, and a new vulnerability emerged that made her more human to me than ever before. People still debate whether empathy is sufficient to heal deep wounds. I wasn't sure it healed anything completely, but it allowed for the possibility of coexistence without daily destruction. One evening, as we prepared dinner together, I felt a strange sense of normalcy returning. The aroma of sautéed vegetables filled the kitchen, Ethan's chatter resonated from the living room, and Lillian laughed at a joke I barely heard. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel anger, betrayal, or despair. Instead, I felt gratitude for the love that still existed for the child who thrived for the opportunity to redefine what family could mean. In that moment, I realized that survival after betrayal wasn't about erasing the past, but embracing the present. Our conversations gradually became more intentional. We discussed minor household decisions, Ethan's school projects, and even our own ambitions. We avoided the past's pain unless it naturally arose. Acknowledging that silence about the diary no longer equated to deception, it was a strategic choice for the well-being of our son. Anthropologists have noted that in certain matriarchal societies, children often belong to the caregiving figure rather than the biological parent, emphasizing nurture over bloodlines. I now understood why emotional bonds can sustain a family even when genetic ties are absent. Ethan's birthday approached, and with it came a sense of both anxiety and hope. Lillian and I planned a small celebration with close friends and family. I noticed her handling the preparations with careful precision, almost as if trying to compensate for past mistakes. I silently appreciated her effort. She was striving to create joy despite the recent upheaval, and I realized that this was one of the hallmarks of true partnership, choosing to nurture rather than punish, to build rather than dwell on destruction. The day of the party arrived, and Ethan's excitement was palpable. He ran around with friends laughing, carrying balloons, and sharing slices of cake. For a moment, I allowed myself to forget the diary, the DNA results, and the complicated truths that had burdened our home. I watched Lillian from across the room, her eyes soft and warm as she helped Ethan with his friends. I felt a cautious optimism bloom in my chest. The house was alive with laughter, love, and chaos, normal family chaos that had the power to heal. Later that evening, after the guests left and the house fell quiet, I sat with Lillian in the living room. We talked about mundane things, the dishes, upcoming school events, and weekend plans. For the first time, our conversations weren't punctuated by tension or unspoken guilt. They were simply moments of connection. I realized that after a storm, calm doesn't return instantly. It must be cultivated patiently, one conversation, one shared activity, one choice at a time. People still debate whether the act of coexisting post-betrayal constitutes forgiveness. I realized it didn't have to. Coexistence alone was a triumph. As the night deepened, I stood by Ethan's bedroom door, watching him sleep. He looked peaceful, untouched by the complexities that had shaken our family. I thought about the strange duality of parenthood. You guide them, protect them, and love them unconditionally, yet you are powerless to shield them from all pain. Still, I felt a quiet pride that despite the secrets, he had thrived. Lillian and I had both survived, and somehow our son had too. The following week, I met Daniel one last time, not to confront him, but to close a chapter. He and I sat quietly in a small cafe, sipping coffee in silence before he spoke. "You've done well with him," he said simply. "Better than I ever could have." I nodded. "I hope you understand," I replied. "This isn't about anger. It's about acceptance." He smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and regret. "I do. He's your son in every way that matters." We parted amicably, the final thread of tension dissolving into quiet understanding. Returning home, I found Lillian setting the table for dinner. I approached her and placed a hand on her shoulder, not as punishment, not as judgment, but as acknowledgement. "We've survived," I said softly. She looked up at me, tears glimmering in her eyes, and nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "we have." As the sun set over our backyard, casting long shadows across the house, I realized that survival after betrayal is not linear. It is filled with setbacks, quiet victories, and moments of grace. We were not restored to our previous state. We were something different, something perhaps stronger, because we had endured. And in the midst of that endurance, our son flourished, our partnership survived, and a new understanding emerged. Family is defined not solely by blood, but by consistent presence, shared responsibility, and enduring love. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the lessons we had learned, the fragility of trust, the resilience of love, and the strange way humans adapt to pain. We could not change the past, but we could shape the future. Our family, though forever altered, was still intact, still capable of joy, still capable of growth. I whispered into the darkness, "We endure not because the world forgives us, but because we choose to." And as I drifted to sleep, I felt a quiet warmth in my chest, a mix of relief, hope, and cautious optimism. The journey had been brutal, the revelations staggering, yet life had granted us the opportunity to continue to rebuild and to redefine what it meant to be a family. In the quiet of our home, amidst the lingering echoes of laughter and the soft presence of my son, I found a fragile but undeniable peace. The house is quiet now. Ethan sleeps soundly upstairs, his small chest rising and falling with effortless innocence. Lillian sits beside me on the couch, her hand lightly touching mine. Not in apology, not in fear, but in shared understanding. We don't need words. The silence carries everything. Betrayal has left its mark. Yes, but it hasn't destroyed the bonds we built. Love, I've realized, is stubborn. It persists in the cracks, in the quiet moments, in the choice to show up every day despite knowing the truth. I think about the lessons this story has taught me, that fatherhood isn't defined by DNA, that honesty can hurt, but concealment can wound even more, and that family is something you actively create and nurture, not something merely inherited. I watch Lillian breathe softly beside me, and I know we'll stumble, argue, and fear. Again, but we'll do it together because surviving isn't about perfection. It's about presence. So to everyone listening tonight, remember your family may not be flawless, but the love you choose to give defines you more than the secrets you uncover. Thank you to all my subscribers and supporters for being part of this journey, for witnessing these stories with me. Good night.